Hello Rayclass, welcome to the Path of Exile build guide for my Offering Stacker Ice Nova cast on crit Elementalist. As usual, you'll find a path of building in the video description, and this time you will also find a link to a fully fleshed out written guide on the forum. I normally don't do full written guides for my builds, but I am pretty proud of this one and hopeful for a Build of the Week feature, so hopefully that'll happen, and I will be posting that full written guide. Feel free to ask questions either in the comments below or on the forum post, and I will try to get to them as I am able. I don't check the forums super often, so if you want a question answered quickly, it's probably best to ask it in the comments section below. So, this is my sort of second real build for the league after that Earthshatter of Prominence Juggernaut that I featured on my last video. And this one has turned out to be quite a banger. In the back here, you will just see a Baron Coves I am running, but just been doing a lot of rounds of Maven Witnesses on Elder Slayers and stuff for farming, doing some bossing and stuff. This is a very, very well-rounded character. It does pretty much everything in the game at a pretty good level. It's not the fastest clearer like a traditional bow character with Tornado Shot or Lightning Arrow, but it clears pretty quickly, as you can see in the background. It's got a lot of layers of defense that make it pretty robust in most situations. There's just a couple things you have to look out for, namely large single physical attacks can be pretty dangerous. But other than that, we're very robust. It's got good single target damage. You can do Ubers. I've done Uber Shaper and Uber Elder, and I think anyone who is good at the fights could probably do all of the rest of them on this build as well. The layers of defense give you a lot of opportunities to screw up and still live, so it feels pretty comfortable in that way. It's good at Delve. This is the deepest I've ever delved. I'm about to hit Delve depth 500 on this character, and still just not really having any issues just blasting through. I'm going to try and make it down to 600 most likely, so I can max out that all spawn chance and do some farming in case I feel like playing another build this league. But yeah, it's turned out really great. I would estimate that the budget on this build is somewhere between 30 and 40 divines at this point. Kind of just depends on what's available when you go looking, how much you're willing to craft yourself, and level gems and quality gems yourself. But it's not a super expensive build. I know that sounds like a lot for some people, but my tastes have gotten a little more expensive over time as I've kept playing Path of Exile, but 30 to 40 divines, I think this is achievable for a lot of people, depending on what is available at the market at the time. So I will let this rest of this map play out and the Baron fight, and then I will see you guys in the hideout, and I will talk through all of the details you need to know about how this build is put together, so you can put it together for yourself if you want to, or use it as inspiration to put together something similar. Alright, welcome back. Here we are in the hideout, and I will try to remember everything that you need to know about this build. So, first off, we're calling it an offering stacker, and that is because we are stacking all three offerings and stacking as much offering effectiveness as possible. When I first saw the list of mods for charms released, I really wanted to make a character like this. I know a lot of other people have thought of similar things as well, and I'm sure they will be putting out some guides on various versions of this also. I've been toying with the idea of an offering stacker for a long time, for several leagues, but it just didn't really seem like the juice was ever going to be worth the squeeze with the limited offering effect that was available. However, the sort of cornerstone of this build that allows it to thrive in the current state here in the Affliction League is charms. Specifically, there is a charm mod that gives your offerings have 30% increased effect on you. So you can stack 3 of those to get 90% increased offering effect on you, and as you can see, I've just gone with elemental resistances on the suffix on those, which makes gearing a lot more comfortable. And then there is also a new unique jewel that comes with a random combination of 4 charm mods, and you can get another 30% effective offerings there. And then I've also just gone with some extra pen and exposure there for more damage as well. So all of that offering effect adds up together. That's 120%. Then you get another 20% from a minion offense accuracy here to get you to 140%. You get another 20% or more if you wanted to go higher, but 20% reasonably on your chest from an Eldritch Implicit, getting you to 160%. So with the minus 40% that Mistress of Sacrifice gives, and I will mention that of course I'm an Elementalist, so we don't normally have access to Mistress of Sacrifice, but we are using Forbidden Flesh and Forbidden Flame. Get that menu away. To get both of those, that gives us Mistress of Sacrifice, which has a minus 40% effective auras of offerings on you, but lets them affect you. So in total, we have 120% increased generic offering effect when you account for the minus 40 for Mistress of Sacrifice. Now, you also get another 10% on each of your offerings from quality. So all in all, this makes it so that Bone Offering gives us capped block and spell block with all of that offering effect. Very strong defensive layer, obviously. This is no glancing blows or anything. This is true capped block and spell block all the time, no flask or anything needed. Makes it so Spirit Offering gives you 330% generic crit chance, which is obviously excellent for a cast on crit build where you're needing lots of both attack and spell crit. And it makes it so Flesh Offering, which we have an additional little bit of percent of effect from a boot implicit here, is giving us about 70% attack, cast, and movement speed, so we can attack really fast and move really fast. Now, to be able to use all 3 offerings simultaneously, you need the Leash of Oblation belt. As you can see, it has this special mod that says you can have an offering of each type. It also comes with some life and attributes and makes it so your offering skills have reduced duration. That's why I've gone with an increased duration support here. We're proccing them constantly, so as long as we're attacking, you don't need the increased duration, you would be fine. But I think it's nice to have this. It makes it so if you go for a while between packs without attacking anything, or like when I'm delving, it makes it so I can just click to the next node without having to swap in my starter setup. So my offerings will just stay on from pack to pack, and I don't have to worry about reapplying them with the starter setup. That's why we're using increased duration here. And to proc all 3 of these offerings, we are using the Asenath's Mark Circlet. This is another thing that sort of held me back from the idea of an offering stacker in the past, is I haven't played a cast on crit build since like the League cast on crit was introduced, however many years ago that was, quite a long time at this point. But I decided finally this was really the only sort of convenient way. You can try some shenanigans with trigger weapons, but I just couldn't come up with a way to make it feel good outside of cast on crit with Asenath's on a bow character. Because if you're going to be exploiting all these offerings, you really do need a way to be proccing them consistently, automatically, because it would just be a major hassle, and again, the juice wouldn't be worth the squeeze no matter how strong it is if you were having to manually cast corpses and offerings all the time. So we've got our ascendancy mark that casts all three of our offerings, and then to generate corpses for those offerings, we're using just a little 4-linked cast on crit setup in our gloves. We have mana forged arrows with a blast rain linked to cast on crit and desecrate. So that is constantly pumping out that blast rain as we're attacking with our main links, which is constantly cast on critting desecrate, which gives us plenty of corpses to be able to keep up all three of our offerings all the time. You could do this with basically any kind of cast on crit setup, but the cast on crit Ice Nova seem particularly strong. The Ice Nova of Frost Bolts just has really big numbers. I think it has about the highest base damage per cast of any kind of normal spell that you could use, so I decided to use that as the setup in this build. And of course that means that we need a second cast on crit setup to proc the Frost Bolts to actually cast our Ice Novas on. So in the chest over here, we are using another Mana Forged Arrows cast on Crit Strike setup. This time I'm using this Rain of Arrows of Artillery. You could use regular Rain of Arrows as well. I'm sure the Rain of Arrows of Artillery just seemed kind of cool. You can't use another Blast Rain because Mana Forged Arrows setups share cooldowns for the same gem across them. Blast Rain is generally the best cast on critter, but yeah, you can only have one of those in a Mana Forged Arrows setup because they share cooldowns even across different link setups and different pieces of gear. So we're using Cast on Critical Strike, Mana Forged Arrows with Rain of Arrows of Artillery, Greater Volley, which importantly doesn't increase the mana cost of Rain of Arrows of Artillery because Volley can't support these types of bow skills, but it does make it so our Frostbolt fires in volleys. And then I've also got a Steel Skin set up here, so that is constantly proccing for us as well, giving us another layer of defense. Originally, I had an Inspiration setup in here, but I realized that I could actually have the mana cost of the setup to 0 without the Inspiration, and my attack crit is capped without the Inspiration as well, so I didn't need it for the reliable crits and was able to slot a Steel Skin in here. Now, as far as mana cost goes, you will notice my Blast Rain here has a mana cost of 1. That is the Blast Rain in my main link setup here, for which I'm using to actually cast the Ice Nova of Frostbolts. So we've got Blast Rain. Cast on Critical comes from the weapon itself, built in from the Shaper support gem. Then we're using Awakened Added Cold, Awakened Cold Pen, Empower, and Inspiration with Ice Nova of Frostbolts. You do want the Inspiration in this one because that we don't quite actually hit 100% chance to crit with our spell. Even with the Inspiration, we're super close, but not quite there. So you definitely want the Inspiration, and you need it to reduce the mana cost to make that manageable. But having that high level and high quality Inspiration means that our Blast Rain only had a mana cost of 20, meaning we want 19 reduced mana cost overall, so I'm using 2 -6 rings and 1 -7 amulet to get the mana cost of the Blast Rain down to 1, and very importantly, that brings the mana cost of our other Blast Rain with Mana Forged Arrows, as well as our Rain of Arrows of Artillery with Mana Forged Arrows. If I hover over those, you can see there is no mana cost listed. If you get the mana cost of those to 0, then literally any mana cost, like the 1 mana cost that we have on our Blast Rain, will make it so that Mana Forged Arrows procs this attack every single time, assuming it's off cooldown. Because Mana Forged Arrows, as it says here, supports the triggered skills once the total mana cost on other bow attacks exceeds 300% of their mana cost. Well, since the mana cost of this Blast Rain and this Rain of Artilleries is 0, that's why spending just a single point of mana on our main Blast Rain will proc our other Blast Rain and the Rain of Arrows of Artillery. So you definitely need to pay attention and make sure that you are tuning your mana costs right when you're using these kind of multiple cast on crit Mana Forged Arrows setup. And ideally, you want the mana cost on the Mana Forged Arrows setups to be 0, and to get the other one that you're using to proc those as low as possible without going to 0. So in this case, 1 mana. As far as our other links go, we are also using a Hatred, Precision, and Grace. Precision obviously gets our accuracy capped out and gives more generic crit, which is excellent for both the attack and the spell. Hatred we are using primarily because Not only is it good damage, of course, but it gives us access to the Watcher's Eye mod, wherever my Watcher's Eye is it down here? Gives us access to this Watcher's Eye mod, this can roll in a range, but on mine, 1.49% to critical strike chance while affected by hatred. That is base critical strike chance that affects both spells and attacks. So again, important for getting our critical strike chance on attacks to 100, and really, really close to 100 on our critical strike chance for the Ice Nova of Frostbolts. We are also using a Frostbite Curse over here. Quality on this is quite important because it increases the freeze duration on enemies, which lets you freeze larger enemies than you would normally be able to. And then we're using an unset ring so that we can fit in a flame dash for an instant movement skill for getting over certain boss mechanics as well as terrain. And then finally, over here in a Maloney's Mechanism in our offhand, we are using Frenzy with GMP and Power Charge on crit. This makes it so when I attack, you'll notice that a Frenzy flies out as well. That sustains both our Frenzy charges and Power charges through the Power Charge on crit while mapping and while doing a single target, so we can have all of our charges up all the time. As far as the rest of the gear here goes, I mentioned we're using Asenats for proccing, and we're using Leash of Oblation so that we can have multiple offerings. Our rare items are quite simple. They are just life, resists, and as much and enough spell suppression to cap out spell suppression, and as much evasion as possible. I don't have my Frenzy charges up in the hideout, but if I pop my flask as 25 with Frenzy charges up, we get a little bit of extra evasion from our thing on the tree. We get to about 28k evasion, which gives us, I think it says like 77% chance to evade attacks. So we've got a pretty decent amount of evasion, so that kind of rounds out our offensive layers. We're going to evade most attacks. Anything we don't evade, we have a 75% chance to block, and similarly with spells, we've got a 75% chance to block, and then anything we don't block, we have capped out suppressed, so we'll reduce the damage on that. So as I mentioned in the intro, the only thing you really need to watch out for on this build is large physical single attacks, because if you happen to not evade and not block, you can definitely get one shot by a large physical attack like a Shaper Slam or whatever, because our physical attack damage is just purely avoidance. We have no mitigation. So if something big happens to pass through both layers of our avoidance, then it's going to do a lot of damage, and you can definitely get one shot. For the rings, we are rings and amulets, our jewelry in general here. It's life and enough resistances to cap out our resistances, and you want some stats. Of course, strength gives extra life, and with some strength between these two, it gives us enough strength to use a maxed out level steel skin in this setup. You're also going to want some dexterity somewhere because we don't get a ton on the tree, and you want to be able to max out your gem levels and use a decent chest. Now, some of these implicits are very important, of course. The 20% increased effective offerings on your chest is crucial, and then I went with a Grace Aura effect for the other one to pump up our agility or our evasion even a little more. On the boots, you definitely want to go with an increased effect on one of your offerings. You can go either Flesh Offering or Bone Offering, or Spirit Offering rather. Don't go Bone Offering because you're already capped out on block and spell block without the extra effect roll here, so you want to target either Flesh Offering or Spirit Offering. And then I went with 17 cooldown recovery rate of travel skills. There's not really a particularly useful or good one there, but that at least lets our Flame Dash come up slightly quicker. Over on the gloves, I went with chance to unnerve enemies on hit. That makes them take 10% increased spell damage, and of course 15% chance from the smallest type of ember is fine because we are hitting so frequently. And I went with 48 accuracy rating per frenzy charge here. I needed that to be able to cap out my accuracy because only one of my pieces of jewelry here has an accuracy roll, which I have upped with attack modifiers. And that, in combination with precision and in combination with this implicit when we have frenzy charges, gets me to capped out accuracy. Now, you definitely need some form of cold leech somewhere so that you have good sustain, and you can get that in the place of this accuracy per frenzy charge. That's an Eater of Worlds implicit. You can go cold leech. However, I was able to grab that as a corruption on an Asenat's Mark here for 0.5% of cold damage leached as life. That gives us really good sustain, especially on the passive tree. We pick up some instant leech, so we actually have really excellent recovery on this build when we do take a hit as well. We'll shoot back up really quickly. As I mentioned, Maloney's mechanism here in the offhand gives us access to essentially free frenzy and power charge generation. And then for my bow here, this is a pretty deterministic craft that isn't terribly hard to do, and it's probably going to cost you around 10 to 12 divines, depending on luck and depending on how much people are selling Iceling T4 veiled mod things for. So my old bow here, which was much cheaper, that I'm currently trying to sell for 4 divines, it's got the cast on crit support, the spell damage, and then it just has the level of support gems and crit chance, but a garbage 3rd suffix because I didn't want to go through the whole unveiling process on this because I was kind of poor when I was trying to get this build off the ground. But what you want to be able to cast, or to be able to craft a bow like this, is essentially you want to find a bow that has the spell damage, which comes from an Essence of Woe, as well as that cast on critical strike prefix, and then you want an open 3rd prefix, and ideally at least 1 open suffix. Then what you can do is craft prefixes cannot be changed and then throw a scour on it, so you'll be left with a rare bow that only has the cast on critical strike and spell damage mods. Then you're going to do can have 3 crafted mods, prefixes cannot be changed again, and craft a random prefix to fill up the 3rd one. This is describing the process for getting this better version of the bow. Then you're going to do an Iceling Unveil, and because you have 3 full prefixes with the random one you crafted and the prefixes cannot be changed, that means it will have to remove either the can have 3 crafted mods or the prefixes cannot be changed, so you're guaranteed to get a veiled suffix. At that point, you'll remove crafted modifiers and craft any one of the 3 increased damage per power, frenzy, or endurance charge on the bow. That blocks out the highest weighted group of unveil mods. Then you'll do the unveil. Ideally, you will unveil either chance to deal double damage while focused or crit strike chance plus stats. The best one would be the double damage while focused, because just a random crafted crit chance will get us easily to attack crit cap, but in this case I unveiled crit chance plus strength and intelligence, and then you're going to remove the damage per charge crafted mod. Once more, you can have up to 3 crafted modifiers, craft +2 to level of socketed support gems, and then craft whichever suffix you didn't get. So if you got a crit, in my case I crafted chance to deal double damage while focused. You could also just do the all the time double damage, but I like the big burst of the double damage while focused. Or if you were able to unveil the double damage while focused, then you would craft crit chance. You could also unveil some form of attack speed or the regular double damage, and those would be fine. And again, you would just craft crit to make sure that you're able to cap out your attack crit beyond that. But ideally, you want to unveil either crit or double damage while focused, and then craft the other one to get the biggest damage possible out of your bow. So that pretty much does it for my gear, but there is one other thing I will mention. Typically, I'm just leveling 9 gems here and another bow with white sockets and a Maloney's mechanism in the offhand to make a little extra money. But you'll notice in some of the footage that during boss fights and at the beginning of a map, or at the beginning of like a delve session, I swap to this bow. In this bow, I have an increased duration, spell cascade, desecrate, and tornado. That increased duration is just to make the tornado last a little longer. Probably not strictly necessary, but there's nothing else important we would have in here anyways. So desecrate spell cascade makes it so that we summon 12 corpses on the ground because we have 2 extra max corpses there from the passive tree. 12 corpses is enough for all 3 of our offerings, and then tornado is something that we can shoot to generate frenzy charges. So then I also have a frenzy and a faster attacks. So you'll see me just swap this. I cast desecrate. Ooh, big lag spike. Cast desecrate, cast tornado, and then, oh my gosh, I'm lagging terribly here. See if the lag spike will end. Are you done, lag spike? Not really, but we'll do desecrate, tornado, and then just shoot the tornado with frenzy 5 times. That makes it so that we can start off an encounter, or between boss phases or whatever, when you don't have anything to hit, you can get all 3 of your offerings and all of your frenzy charges up really easy. And then I just swap back. I keep the extra bow here in my rucksack so that I can keep leveling all these gems. If you don't want to bother with that, you can just leave it in all the time. So you just do your desecrate, tornado, shoot it with frenzy, get all 3 of your offerings and frenzy up, and you just hit X to swap back to your main weapon setup, and you're good to go. And from then on, your cast on crit desecrate will generate plenty of corpses for you to keep all 3 offerings up. So that is how the gearing and gem setups work on this gear, or on this character. Now we'll go through the passive tree. I am an Elementalist, and I have taken Mastermind of Discord and Heart of Destruction for a bunch of really good damage. Shaper of Storms makes it so all our hits can, or all our damage can shock, so we get some pretty decent shocks with that as well for another nice boost of damage. And then finished off with Bastion of Elements here, which makes it so that we can run Reflect stuff and gives us a pretty nice Elemental Aegis shield to protect us from elemental damage. And of course, on your Wildwood Ascendancy, you're just grabbing all of the charm slots so that you can stack as much offering effect as possible. Now, we start by going out through spell damage. You don't care about attack speed at all in this character, of course, because you're cast on crit. We grab some life and mana here, and up through the spell crit, up through the power charges, and we get our first jewel socket, which, we're using 4 jewels, as I mentioned, a Forbidden Flesh and Flame, that which was taken in a Watcher's Eye. We go over here and get the power charge stuff for some more nice generic crit and damage, as well as life node. We grab all this nice cold stuff here, and you'll notice incidentally on this tree, I do really think that the Ice Nova of Frostbolts is probably the best way to go on this build, but you're right next to the fire and lightning wheels as well, so you could really do just about any spell you want with this, and then just take the nodes correspondingly. We got Breath of Rime, which gives us big increased duration of cold ailments so that we can freeze bigger targets. We're using the Cold Mastery that makes enemies take 5% increased damage for each second they've ever been frozen by you for another nice damage boost, and of course going up to Heart of Ice. Over here we take a 3-point jewel slot to fit one of our jewels in, and it gives us some more mana as well. Kind of ugly pathing whenever you have to go in a loop, but that's just the way things worked out here because you definitely want to go down to Undertaker. These are pretty nice damage nodes in general. You've got a 14, 16, and 30 if you've consumed a corpse recently, and we always have, and then this one also gives you 2% life regen if you consumed a corpse recently, so that's really strong as well. And most importantly, it gives you access to another 20% increased effective offerings from the mastery there. We grab the nice little influence wheel here to bump up our aura effectiveness a bunch. We grab more spell crit here, and for 1 crit mastery, we take the increased effect of non-damaging ailments you inflict with critical strikes for, again, bigger shocks and bigger chills. In through this life and 1 spell suppression wheel. Then we just come down into the assassin area here for some more life and nice generic crit nodes. Traveling down the right side of the tree, we grab a power charge and a frenzy charge and another jewel slot. We grab some accuracy and crit, which again is generic crit and helps us cap out. And you will notice that on this passive tree, you don't actually have to take any attack crit, any specific attack crit or bow crit or anything. You'll hit capped out crit just with the power charges and the massive generic amount of crit you get from Spirit Offering and the few little generic crit things we've taken here along with the base crit from Hatred. So you don't need to take any attack or bow specific crit. All of your specific crit points just go into spell crit to try and get our Ice Nova up near the top. So we grab some life here as well, of course. We grab this life and mana on hit plus Clever Thief, which gives us attack damage leached as life and mana. The leech's life doesn't really matter, but it is enough to pretty much fill up our mana leech with the Clever Thief because we are using Awakened added cold damage, which adds quite a lot of flat cold to our Blast Rain in addition to the Ice Nova of Frostbolts. So that actually gives us enough damage to fill up our mana leech pool, and that in combination with the 2 mana per hit enemies with attacks there makes it so that we can sustain all of our casting. And then that also gives us access to the 10% of Leech's instant, and because we are putting out a really large number of pretty hard hits per second with the Ice Nova of Frostbolts, and we've got the cold damage leeched as life on our Azanas, or you can get it as an implicit on your gloves, that means we actually really heavily benefit from this instant leech, and our life can fill up really fast, even on a single target, and especially if you're attacking into a pack of monsters, anytime you get hit, your life will instantly bounce back to full because of that instant leech. Go down here and grab a spell suppression wheel, and for now I have this extra 3% spell suppress here. I'm currently level 96. If you were someone who is going to level all the way to 100 on this character, when you get 97, I would recommend just ditching this spell suppression mastery and then put 2 points into here for elemental focus. That gives you more shock effect and freeze duration again so that you can shock and freeze bigger targets. And then you'd be 97. If you were going to go all the way to 100, I would put in these 3 points to get Snow Forged, which is going to give you a decent amount of damage and another minus 5% resist on enemies. But for now, I felt like the 3% extra suppress was pretty much the best thing I could do with only one spare point. Finally, down here we go and get another Frenzy Charge, and we get the Heartseeker Wheel, which gives us access to another 25 crit multi against unique enemies from that mastery. This is where I've got my Watcher's Eye, and then we fell out with some more health down here at Herbalism. And you'll notice that on my amulet I have Anointed Charisma. That lets us fit in a max level Precision along with Hatred and Grace on our mana pool, while having just enough left over to actually cast all of our spells. So that's it for the passive tree. And of course, as I mentioned, you get Mistress of Sacrifice from the Forbidden Flesh and Forbidden Flame, and you want to look for a That Which Was Taken with the 30% offering effect and whatever other good mods on there you can get. Finally, we have the Pantheon. I've gone with Soul of the Brine King. Makes it so you can't be chain stunned, and you definitely want to get all the upgrades for this, because this also gives you your freeze immunity from Merveil, reduced effective chill on you, and faster stun and block recovery, so that when you do eat a stun or a block recovery, you get over it much quicker. And then down here, I really like Soul of Risloth on pretty much all the builds I play. Makes sure your life flask is pretty much always going to be up when you need it. Increased life recovery from flasks when used on low life, and then I combine that with a wary mod, or a higher tier version of the same mod here that gives more recovery when on low life. So if you're below half life and you slam your flask, between this and that flask mod, it will just like instantly fill you up. It's almost like using an instant flask. And then that reduced life regeneration rate is also really nice if you're doing a destructive play strategy on the Atlas tree like I am, so you pretty much always have Maven on all your bosses. When she heals them, that'll get rid of half of that, and you don't have to carry around a separate Frost Bomb setup. As far as flasks go, I'm using a Chemist's Quicksilver of the Cheetah to just move as quickly as possible. Then we're using a Silver Flask for Onslaught, and I'm using a Crit Suffix on this. I believe our attack crit is maxed out even without that, but again, this helps us get a little closer to cap out on the spell crit. And then I'm just using a Jade and a Stibnite to get as much evasion as possible. And then I really like this reduced curse effect roll on you on one flask as well. It makes it so you don't really have to worry so much about curse mods on maps. And I believe that really is all that you need to know about the build. Again, the path of building will be in the description. I'll also stick a leveling tree link in that path of building. I leveled this character just as self-cast Ice Nova Frostbolts, which is also really, really strong, by the way, especially with Spell Echo. Just insane damage output on that. It was probably the highest damage I've ever had during the leveling process. And I wouldn't recommend trying to switch over into a cast on crit setup until you're about 74 or 75, I think is the earliest that you can realistically fill out your tree enough for it to feel comfortable to switch to the cast on crit setup, and you'll be high enough to equip pretty much all of your gear. So at the end of the video here, I will stick some boss fights. I think I'll do like Elder Slayers and a Feared and an Uber Shaper probably. You'll notice that in the Uber Shaper fight, it's particularly simple because with our layers of defense, and then I just throw in a Sapphire Flask when I'm doing Uber Shaper or Uber Elder, we can pretty much just face tank the balls, so all you really have to look out for is slams and beams, which makes that fight pretty simple. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments or in the forum thread that will be linked, and I will try to answer them as I am able. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you on the next build guide.
So brittle. Stalk and hunt. Take this rectangular. Mortal flesh is so fallible. A mote of my might. What a gift! This has been most entertaining. Take the prize.